As the crisis in Ukraine deepens, it's important to consider what the actual consequences of war there might be. Right now, U.S. officials estimate the fighting could kill up to 50,000 civilians.
Could Putin actually use tactical nuclear weapons in his ongoing war in Ukraine? Putin has long signaled that he intends to escalate the war in Ukraine and has put Russia's nuclear force on high alert. War experts have also warned that Putin could result in using nuclear weapons if he felt the war was being lost. His assault on Ukraine has failed to yield the quick victories he had anticipated and has instead rallied a concerted Western response that is potentially devastating for Russia's economy, with the EU and U.S. further announcing new and more stringent measures against Moscow. In the absence of a quick military breakthrough, Putin has ordered Russia's military to put its nuclear deterrence forces on high alert, ramping up fears that he could be prepared to deploy weapons of mass destruction in an effort to bring the war in Ukraine to a swift end. With Putin facing dogged Ukrainian resistance and an increasingly aggressive Western response to his invasion, some experts have speculated that the move to ready atomic weapons could be an attempt by Putin to avoid the humiliation of withdrawing his troops without toppling the government in Kyiv. Others have speculated that the announcement does not mean that Putin actually intends to use the weapons, but has merely put them into a special mode of combat service, largely in response to the West's unfriendly steps and open support for Ukraine. Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal of any nation in the world, and Putin, being Putin, could as well deploy nuclear missiles not just in Ukraine, but in a full-blown war across Europe. So in today's video, we separate facts from mere speculations and detail just how Putin plans on deploying these missiles. You definitely want to watch this one till the very end. But before that, make sure to give this video a like, hit the subscribe button and smash the notification bell to receive notifications of when we post more interesting videos about one of the most influential and most feared men in the world right now. Do leave us a comment as well, as we'd love to read your opinions about Putin's planned use of nuclear weapons in his ongoing war in Ukraine. What tactical nuclear weapons does Russia have, and just how powerful are they? Russia is thought to have about 2,000 tactical nuclear weapons that can be placed on various types of missiles and used to deliver conventional explosives, as well as serve as artillery shells on a battlefield. Russia's tactical nuclear weapons vary enormously in size and power, with the smallest weighing just about 1 kiloton and the largest ones being as big as 100 kilotons. Now, while the effects of these weapons upon launching would depend on the size of the warhead, how far above the ground it detonates, and the local environment, Russia appears to be more willing to use smaller tactical weapons than larger strategic missiles and consider them as part of their conventional forces. Russia's willingness to deploy these tactical weapons actually happens to be in consonance with Putin's popular theory of escalate to de-escalate that he has come to be known with during most of his conflicts with NATO. Whenever Putin has felt cornered by NATO, he does something very dramatic, such as using a tactical weapon on the battlefield that would serve as a game changer to break a stalemate or avoid defeat. And with the situation already getting worse both in Ukraine and back in Russia, Putin is fully geared up to deploy this popular card from his playbook and turn the tide around. How the US and NATO would respond to Russia's nuclear use is hard to predict. They may not want to escalate the situation further and risk an all-out war, but they also might want to draw a line and adopt a tougher conventional response, a scenario Putin is fully prepared for. Putin fully understands that once the nuclear threshold has been crossed, there is no obvious stopping point. Putin has repeatedly told foreign countries not to interfere in his invasion of Ukraine and warned that it could lead to consequences they have never seen. The blatant refusal by these countries, who have refused to be intimidated by Putin's threats and have continued to lend their support to Ukraine, has hurt Putin's ego and is a clear motivation for why he's decided to use nuclear weapons. He has now positioned anti-air missiles and other advanced missile systems in Belarus and deployed his fleet to the Black Sea in an effort to prevent further Western intervention in Ukraine. The government in Belarus, in their support of Russia, has on their part claimed that a referendum had approved constitutional changes, revoking its neutrality and its nuclear-free status. A change that would allow Russia to station nuclear weapons on Belarus territory. Putin is now all set to launch limited nuclear strikes that would inflict such punishing damage on Ukraine and force a victory. With Ukraine still putting up a fight, it has become all but clear to Putin that he cannot afford to fail or lose this war, as that would almost certainly imply that his time in power is over, leaving a legacy of humiliation and defeat. Tactical nuclear weapons are often called battlefield or theater weapons to distinguish them from much more powerful strategic nuclear weapons. But they are far more destructive than conventional weapons. Reportedly, the smallest tactical weapon in the Russian nuclear arsenal has a yield of about 1/3 the size of the Hiroshima or Nagasaki bombs, or equivalent to about 5,000 tons of TNT. But how exactly could Putin be looking to fire some sort of warning shots using these tactical nuclear weapons? Well, a first and probably the least provocative way would be for Putin to resume above-ground nuclear testing by detonating a low-yield nuclear warhead high above Novaya Zemlya, Russia's old Soviet test site in the Arctic. Whilst both the actual damage on the ground and radioactive fallout would be negligible, the psychological effect on Ukraine and the world over would be enormous. Essentially, this would be the first nuclear explosion by a superpower since nuclear testing ended in 1992, and the first bomb detonated in the atmosphere by either the US or Russia after such tests were outlawed by treaty in 1963. It would also be a potent reminder that Putin has tactical nuclear weapons in abundance, about 2,000 by last count, and is prepared to use them. Another, even more provocative demonstration would be an ultra-high altitude explosion of a more powerful weapon over Ukraine itself. This would no doubt generate a global reaction that could prompt the outbreak of a full-blown war, a scenario that Putin has thoroughly thought through and is well ready for. For context, when the US detonated a 1.4 megaton H-bomb in the mid-Pacific in a 1962 test, 250 miles above the Earth, the resulting electromagnetic pulse unexpectedly knocked out streetlights and disrupted telephone services in Hawaii 900 miles distant. A similarly powerful explosion above Kyiv would not only be visually spectacular, but would likely plunge Ukraine's capital city into prolonged darkness and silence by shorting out computers, cell phones, and other electronics. The EMP effects of an explosion over Ukraine might also extend into NATO member countries. But the extent of damage from the pulse is unpredictable, and Russian communications could also be affected. Putin could also choose to explore another dangerous option by launching a ground explosion on Ukraine. This option is very unlikely, as the extent of the damages it would cause is impossible to predict. But it would help Putin achieve a concrete military objective, such as disrupting the delivery of weapons to Ukrainians fighting in a city like Mariupol. If Putin were to attack Kyiv, or any major Ukrainian city for that matter, with a weapon 1/3 the Hiroshima yield, the resulting casualties and destruction of property could approach that seen in Japan. While any of these scenarios might seem unlikely and far-fetched with any other world leader, they definitely aren't to Putin. Not especially when he has a logical reason to initiate the use of nuclear weapons: the stalemate in Ukraine. Wars are very unpredictable, and there are ample precedents in history where a nuclear demonstration has been considered, even by the United States. However Putin chooses to launch his nuclear attack on Ukraine, it would open up the question of what the US and NATO's best response would be. If Putin fires a nuclear warning shot in the Ukraine war, it's our belief that President Joe Biden would as much as possible resist pressure to respond in kind and avoid any options that could lead to an escalating nuclear exchange. Instead, the president should rally the nations of the world in a universal condemnation of Putin for breaking the nuclear treaty and taking the most dangerous first step towards a full-blown nuclear war. Putin has claimed on a number of occasions that Russia is the global leader in hypersonic missiles, whose speed, maneuverability, and altitude make them difficult to track and intercept. Russia first used the hypersonic missile during its military campaign in Syria in 2016, and Ukraine could very well be Putin's next location. And even as Russia continues its military attacks in Ukraine, its defense ministry has held a test launch of a new nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile. The weapon, which has been dubbed the Sarmat or Satan II, possesses a greater throw weight, faster speeds, and improved survivability compared to its predecessors. Could Ukraine be the first receptor of the Sarmat? The whole world might as well have been wrong thinking we've gone past the Cold War and nuclear era. Putin clearly has plans to take the world back to an earlier era of warfare, dominated by the use of nuclear weapons. And just how NATO reacts to a nuclear launch on Ukraine by Russia might be the sole determinant of all of these. Disclaimer: this is purely an informational video, and we're in no way promoting or approving Putin's recent action in any way.